At 0847 on March 24, 1944, First Lieutenant Robert L. Campbell sat in the left seat of B-17G Milk Wagon at Grafton Underwood Airfield, watching 728 bombers climb into formation above the English countryside. 23 years old, 18 combat missions, 0 losses. The target was Berlin, 600 miles into Germany, the deepest penetration the 8th Air Force had ever attempted. Campbell had enlisted in the Army Air Corps in 1942, trained at Randolph Field in Texas, graduated 3rd in his pilot class. He flew B-17Es in training, then B-17Fs on his first 6 missions. The G model was different. Chin turret with twin .50 caliber machine guns mounted in a Bendix power turret. Improved armor plating behind the pilot seats. 1-inch steel protecting vital crew positions. Better oxygen distribution system with redundant lines. More bombs. The aircraft weighed 65,000 pounds fully loaded, 36,000 pounds empty, 29,000 pounds of fuel, bombs, ammunition, and crew. 4 Wright R1 820-97 Cyclone engines, 1,200 horsepower each at 2,500 RPM. 9-cylinder radial design, maximum speed 287 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. Cruising speed 182 miles per hour. Service ceiling 35,600 feet. Combat radius 1,850 miles with reduced bomb load. Range 2,000 miles maximum. Today's load was maximum. 12 500-pound M43 general-purpose bombs, 6,000 pounds of high explosives, amatol filling, impact fuses, fuel tanks full, 2,810 gallons in 9 self-sealing tanks. Tokyo, tanks in the wings. Main tanks in the fuselage. Every available pound of weight dedicated to reaching Berlin and destroying German industry. The B-17G cost $238,329 to build. Boeing built 8,680 of them between September 1943 and April 1945. Douglas and Lockheed built another 4,000 under license. Total production, 12,731 aircraft. Milk Wagon was serial number 42-31706, delivered to the 8th Air Force in January 1944. 2 months old, 18 combat missions. Today would be number 19. The 384 Bomb Group had been at Grafton Underwood since June 1943. 10 months of combat operations, 89 missions flown, 22 aircraft lost, 220 men killed or captured. The statistics were brutal but consistent. Strategic bombing doctrine demanded acceptable losses in exchange for target destruction. Berlin represented the ultimate test of that doctrine. If American bombers could hit Berlin in daylight and survive, they could hit anywhere. If they failed, the entire strategic bombing campaign faced reconsideration. Campbell's crew had been together since October 1943. 5 months of combat. 18 missions flown together. Co-pilot 2nd Lieutenant James Murdoch, 21 years old, from Portland, Oregon. Navigation training before switching to pilot school. Graduated Randolph Field 2 months after Campbell. Bombardier 1st Lieutenant David Chen, 24. MIT graduate, mathematics degree. Thesis on ballistic calculations. His family ran a restaurant in San Francisco. Navigator 2nd Lieutenant William Foster, 22, from Baltimore. Former merchant marine. Sailed Atlantic convoys before joining the Army Air Forces. He knew celestial navigation from merchant service. Flight Engineer Technical Sergeant Frank Kozlowski, 28, from Detroit. Worked Ford River Rouge plant before the war. Assembly line experience. Understood engines intimately. Could diagnose problems by sound alone. Radio Operator Technical Sergeant Raymond Blake, 20, from rural Kansas. ham radio operator since age 14, built his first transmitter from scrap parts. The Army Air Forces needed radio operators. Blake was perfect. Ball turret gunner Staff Sergeant Michael Sullivan, 19, high school dropout from Chicago. Worked stockyards before enlisting. Small frame, 5 feet 6 inches, 140 pounds. Perfect size for the ball turret. The cramped sphere beneath the bomber required someone small. Sullivan fit. Waist gunners Staff Sergeant Robert Martinez from El Paso and Staff Sergeant John Williams from Alabama, both 21. Martinez worked family farm before the war. Williams worked coal mines. Both were tough. Both could handle the freezing waist gun positions. Tail gunner Staff Sergeant Thomas Crawford, 23, commercial fisherman from Maine. Worked lobster boats off the coast. Understood cold. Understood isolation. The tail position was both. 10 men, 1 aircraft. Different backgrounds, different skills. Together they formed a combat crew. Each man essential, each man trusting the others. Mission 134 for the 384th Bomb Group. The formation assembled at 12,000 feet. The 384th flew as part of the 41st Combat Wing. 54 B-17s in 3 groups. The Combat Wing was one element of a larger force. 728 bombers total, 644 B-17 Flying Fortresses, and 84 B-24 Liberators. The escort included 891 fighters, P-47 Thunderbolts for initial coverage over the Channel, P-38 Lightnings for intermediate escort into Germany, P-51 Mustangs for target penetration and withdrawal. This was the largest escort mission ever flown. The fighters would stay with the bombers all the way to Berlin and back. Previous deep penetration missions had faced catastrophic losses when fighters turned back at maximum range. Not today. The Mustangs had drop tanks. They could reach Berlin. The bomber stream stretched 94 miles from first aircraft to last. At cruising speed of 180 miles per hour, the formation would take 31 minutes to pass any given point. German radar would detect the formation over the North Sea. The Luftwaffe would scramble every available fighter. Intelligence estimated 350 German fighters defending Berlin. Me-109s, FW-190s, Me-110 night fighters pressed into day service, even captured P-47s repainted with German markings. The defenses included 8,800 mm flak guns in overlapping zones around the city. Each gun fired 15 to 20 rounds per minute. Shells burst at preset altitudes, creating lethal fragments in spheres 200 feet in diameter. One direct hit could destroy a bomber. Near misses could cripple engines, rupture fuel tanks, kill crew members. Flak was mathematically simple. Enough guns firing enough shells at a predictable formation would eventually score hits. The question wasn't whether bombers would be hit. The question was how many would make it home. Campbell pushed the throttles forward at 0912. The 4 Cyclone engines responded smoothly. Milk Wagon rolled down the runway, 6,500 feet of concrete. The B-17 lifted off at 110 miles per hour. Landing gear retracted. Flaps came up. Campbell climbed at 300 feet per minute. Throttles at 2,300 RPM. Manifold pressure 38 inches. The aircraft joined the formation stream. The 384th assembled in combat box formation. 9 aircraft in 3 elements. Lead element flew center and slightly ahead. High element positioned above and behind. Low element below and behind. The staggered formation provided overlapping defensive fire from 90 machine guns. Any fighter attacking the formation would face converging fire from multiple aircraft. If you want to see how Milk Wagon survived 103 flak hits over Berlin, please hit that like button. It helps us share these forgotten stories with more people. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Campbell and his crew. The bomber stream crossed the English coast at Orford Ness at 0954. The North Sea stretched ahead, 150 miles of open water before reaching the Dutch coast. Campbell held altitude at 12,000 feet. The formation would climb to bombing altitude later. Fuel conservation required gradual ascent. The temperature at 12,000 feet was minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit. The crew wore heated flight suits. Electric wiring ran through the fabric. Plug-in connections at oxygen stations. The heating wasn't perfect. Gunners in the waist and tail positions still froze. Their stations had open windows for the .50 caliber guns. Wind speed at 180 miles per hour created brutal wind chill. At 10:27, the formation crossed the Dutch coast near Den Helder. German radar had been tracking them for 30 minutes. Luftwaffe fighter bases across Holland and Germany scrambled interceptors. The P-47 escort peeled off. Their range limit had been reached. The P-38 Lightnings moved in, twin-boom fighters with distinctive silhouettes. The Lightnings would stay with the bombers for another 200 miles. Then the Mustangs would take over for the final push to Berlin. German fighters made first contact at 10:49 over Osnabrück. 12 Me-10-9s diving through the formation. They singled out stragglers, damaged aircraft, anyone falling behind the protection of the combat box. The 384th maintained tight formation. Machine guns tracked the fighters. Tracer fire laced the sky. The Me-10-9s made one pass and climbed away. Standard tactics: hit and run. Preserve fuel and ammunition for multiple attacks. The bomber stream continued east. The formation climbed to 20,000 feet. Oxygen became critical. The crew connected to walk-around oxygen bottles when moving between stations. Running out of oxygen at 20,000 feet meant unconsciousness in 30 seconds, death in 3 minutes. At 11:34, the formation reached 25,000 feet, final bombing altitude. The temperature had dropped to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The plexiglass nose was frosted. Chen, the bombardier, cleared ice from his bomb sight. Visibility was critical for the bomb run. Campbell watched his instrument panel. Oil pressure steady on all 4 engines. Cylinder head temperatures normal. Fuel consumption tracking projections, everything nominal. The P-38 escort turned back at 11:56. Maximum range reached. The Mustangs closed in, silver P-51s with checkered noses. The 4th Fighter Group, Debden Eagles. They would stay with the bombers all the way to target. At 12:14, German Flak opened fire. The first bursts appeared 2,000 feet below the formation, black puffs of smoke. Each puff represented one 88mm shell detonating. The German gunners were ranging, finding altitude and trajectory. Within 2 minutes, the bursts moved closer, 1,000 feet below, then 500 feet, then level with the formation. Campbell felt the aircraft shudder. Near misses. Fragments rattling against the fuselage. The sound was distinctive, like hail on a tin roof. But hail didn't kill. Kozlowski in the flight engineer position called out damage reports. Number 3 engine showed fluctuating oil pressure. Not critical yet. Manageable. The formation was 15 minutes from the initial point. The IP was the navigation marker where the bomb run began. From the IP to target release, the bombers flew straight and level. No evasive maneuvers. The bombardiers needed stable platforms for accurate bombing. Straight and level flight over heavy flak was suicide. But strategic bombing doctrine required it. At 12:27, the formation reached the IP. Chen took control of the aircraft through the bomb sight. The Norden bomb sight was connected to the autopilot. Chen made minute corrections to heading and speed. Campbell's hand stayed on the controls, ready to take over if something went wrong. The flak intensified. Berlin's defenses included 400 heavy flak guns positioned in concentric rings around the city. The guns fired in coordinated salvos, 30 shells per salvo, salvos every 6 seconds. At any given moment, 200 shells were in the air. The sky turned black. Smoke from thousands of bursts obscured the sun. Campbell watched a B-17 in the high element take a direct hit. The number 2 engine exploded. The wings separated. The aircraft rolled inverted and fell. No parachutes. 9 men gone in 2 seconds. Another B-17 caught fire. Flames streamed from the bomb bay. The pilot held formation for 30 seconds. Then, the aircraft dropped out. This time, parachutes appeared. 6, 7, 8. The crew was abandoning. The burning bomber fell through the formation. Other aircraft maneuvered to avoid collision. The combat box integrity wavered. The gaps created vulnerability. German fighters circled the formation perimeter, waiting for stragglers. At 12:29, Wagon took its first major hit. The 88mm shell detonated 50 feet off the right wing. Flak shell weight 20 pounds. Muzzle velocity 2,690 feet per second. Time fuse set for 25,000 feet altitude. The shell contained 2 pounds of high explosive, surrounded by a steel casing designed to fragment into 1,500 pieces upon detonation. Each fragment weighed between 1 ounce and 4 ounces. Velocity at fragment dispersion 3,000 feet per second. Lethal radius 200 feet. Wagon was inside that radius. Campbell felt the blast wave. The aircraft lurched left. The concussion hit like a physical blow. The right wing flexed upward 6 inches from the pressure differential. Fragments tore through aluminum skin. The distinctive sound of metal puncturing metal. Sharp cracks. Multiple impacts simultaneously. The number 3 engine erupted in smoke. Oil pressure dropped to 0 in 2 seconds. Cylinder head temperature spiked to 285 degrees Celsius. Normal operating temperature was 232 degrees Celsius. The engine was cooking itself. Engine fire warning light illuminated. Red light on the panel. Kozlowski hit the fire suppression system. The CO2 bottle discharged 15 pounds of carbon dioxide into the engine nacelle. The gas displaced oxygen. Without oxygen, combustion stopped. The fire went out, but the engine was dead. Oil was pouring from severed lines. The propeller was still windmilling, spinning in the slipstream, creating massive drag. 500 pounds of drag force pulling the aircraft right. Campbell feathered the propeller, pressed the feathering button. Electric motor rotated the propeller blades, aligned them with airflow, stopped rotation. The blades aligned with the airflow, reduced drag to manageable levels. 3 engines remaining. The B-17 could fly on 3 engines. Maximum speed reduced to 210 miles per hour. Rate of climb cut by 40%. But the aircraft was still airworthy. The manual said a B-17 could fly on 2 engines. Campbell hoped he wouldn't test that capability. Chen's voice came through the intercom, "Bombs away in 90 seconds." Campbell held the course. The flak was hitting closer now. The German gunners had perfect range. They were firing salvos. 30 guns firing simultaneously, creating a box barrage, shells exploding in a predetermined volume of airspace. The bombers had to fly through that volume to reach the target. There was no way around it. Every burst was at formation altitude. Fragments punched through aluminum skin. The sound was constant. Metallic impacts. Things breaking. Wires snapping. Hydraulic fluid spraying. At 12:30, the Flaky barrage reached maximum intensity. 15 shells detonating per second. The formation disappeared in black smoke. Campbell couldn't see the lead aircraft. Navigation was by instruments alone. Airspeed 155 miles per hour. Altitude 25,000 feet. Heading 087 degrees. Then everything went wrong simultaneously. Fragment penetration number 2. A piece of shrapnel the size of a fist tore through the cockpit floor. It severed the main hydraulic line. Red fluid sprayed across Campbell's legs. Hydraulic pressure dropped from 1,500 psi to 0 in 4 seconds. Without hydraulics, the landing gear couldn't extend. The bomb bay doors couldn't open. The brakes wouldn't function. Fragment penetration number 3. Another fragment entered through the radio compartment. It cut the oxygen distribution line. Pressure dropped throughout the aircraft. The crew had maybe 5 minutes of oxygen remaining in their walk-around bottles. After that, hypoxia, unconsciousness, death. Fragment penetration number 4. The ball turret took a direct hit. Sullivan was inside. The turret jammed. The gun stopped firing. No response from Sullivan on the intercom. Fragment penetrations 5 through 103 occurred in the next 15 seconds. The aircraft was being systematically destroyed. Fragments ripped through the fuselage, wings, tail. Control cables were severed. Fuel tanks punctured. Electrical systems damaged. The number 4 engine began running rough, RPM fluctuating. Campbell advanced the throttle. The engine steadied, but he could feel it failing. Chen's voice cut through the chaos. Bombs away. 12 500-pound bombs dropped from the bay. The aircraft jumped 3,000 pounds lighter. Campbell banked left, breaking away from the IP. The bomb run was over. Time to get out of the flak zone. But Wagon wasn't responding normally. The control cables were damaged. Aileron response was sluggish. The aircraft wanted to roll right. Campbell and Murdoch together pushed the control column left. They held it there. Constant pressure. The bomber flew crooked. Right wing low. Murdoch called out the damage assessment. Number 3 engine dead. Number 4 engine failing. Hydraulics 0. Oxygen system destroyed. Ball turret inoperative. Sullivan not responding. The aircraft was crippled, but it was still flying. Campbell checked his fuel gauges. 1,800 gallons remaining, enough to reach England. Maybe. The formation was reforming. Aircraft closing gaps. Dead bombers falling away. The 384th had lost 6 aircraft over the target. 54 men. The cost of bombing Berlin in daylight. The German fighters returned at 12:47. With the flak zone behind them, the fighters moved in, 30 Mi-10-9s attacking from 12 o'clock high, diving through the formation. The waist gunners opened fire, Martinez and Williams working their guns. The twin .50 calibers hammered. Spent casings piled up on the floor. The Mi-109s flashed past. 2 bombers took hits. 1 fell immediately. The other struggled, but maintained position. Campbell held Wagon in formation. The damaged aircraft was slower than the rest. 195 miles per hour maximum speed. The formation was pulling ahead. Campbell pushed the remaining engines harder. Manifold pressure, 42 inches. RPM, 2,500. The engines were operating beyond normal limits, but without them the bomber would fall behind. Falling behind meant becoming a target. German fighters hunted stragglers. At 13:12, Kozlowski climbed down from the flight engineer position. He opened the ball turret manually. Sullivan was dead. A fragment had penetrated the turret and struck him in the chest. Kozlowski removed the body, closed the turret, returned to his position. The intercom was silent for 30 seconds. Then Crawford, the tail gunner, spoke. He was 19 years old. He's the first one we've lost. Campbell responded. He won't be the last unless we get home. Stay alert. The formation crossed back into Holland at 13:56. The Mustang escort was still with them. The P-51s had engaged German fighters throughout the withdrawal. The sky was littered with burning aircraft, German and American, the cost of air superiority. The number 4 engine failed completely at 14:23. Oil pressure 0, temperature critical. Campbell feathered the propeller, 2 engines remaining, number 1 and number 2, both on the left wing. The aircraft became nearly impossible to control. The asymmetric thrust wanted to spin the bomber right. Campbell and Murdoch both stood on the left rudder pedal. Full deflection. The aircraft flew sideways through the air, crabbing at a 15-degree angle. Airspeed dropped to 165 miles per hour. The formation pulled away. Wagon was alone. The P-51s noticed. 4 Mustangs dropped back, formed a protective escort around the crippled bomber. The fighters would stay with Campbell all the way to England. At 14:51, the bomber crossed the Dutch coast. The North Sea stretched ahead. 150 miles to England. Campbell did the math. 165 miles per hour ground speed. 54 minutes to the English coast. Fuel remaining 890 gallons. Consumption rate 180 gallons per hour on 2 engines. They would make it. Barely. But landing was another problem. Without hydraulics, the landing gear had to be cranked down manually. Emergency procedure. A hand crank in the radio compartment. It took 50 turns to lower the main gear. Another 30 turns for the nose wheel. The process required 2 men. 15 minutes of continuous cranking. Blake and Kozlowski went to work at 15:05. Campbell felt the gear dropping. The aircraft vibration changed. Drag increased. Airspeed decreased to 155 miles per hour. The 2 mechanics cranked continuously. Their arms burned. The hand crank was designed for emergency use. Not optimal, not easy, just functional. At 15:18, the main gear locked down. Green indicator lights on the panel. The nose gear remained up. Blake and Kozlowski kept cranking. At 15:22, the nose gear locked. Full green panel. The gear was down. But without hydraulic pressure, the brakes wouldn't work. Campbell would have to use the emergency brake system, a hand pump in the cockpit. Murdoch would pump while Campbell controlled the aircraft. 30 pumps to build enough pressure for minimal braking. They would get one chance. If they missed the runway or couldn't stop, they would crash. The English coast appeared at 15:44. White cliffs, green fields. Campbell headed for RAF Manston. Emergency landing field on the Kent coast. 9,000-foot runway, designed for damaged bombers. Campbell called the tower at 15:49. Manston Tower, this is Wagon. B-17. 2 engines, no hydraulics. Emergency landing. The tower responded immediately. Wagon, you are cleared for straight-in approach. Runway 28. Wind 270 at 12 knots. Crash crews standing by. Campbell lined up on final approach. Altitude 1,000 feet. Airspeed 140 miles per hour. The approach speed was too fast. Normal landing speed was 90 miles per hour. But with 2 engines and heavy damage, Campbell needed extra speed for control. He would touch down fast and use every foot of runway. At 500 feet, Campbell lowered flaps manually. The flap handle required 40 pounds of force without hydraulic assist. Murdoch helped. The flaps extended part way, enough to slow the aircraft to 120 miles per hour. At 200 feet, Campbell reduced power. The bomber descended at 400 feet per minute. Too fast, but manageable. The runway threshold passed beneath them at 15:52. Campbell pulled the throttles to idle. The wheels hit concrete at 115 miles per hour. The impact was hard. The landing gear struts compressed fully. The aircraft bounced, came down again, stayed down. Murdoch started pumping the emergency brake. 1 pump, 2 pumps, 10 pumps. Campbell felt minimal braking response. Not enough. The bomber was rolling too fast. 3,000 feet of runway used, 6,000 feet remaining. Murdoch kept pumping. 20 pumps, 30. The brake pressure built slowly. Campbell applied brakes. The aircraft decelerated. 100 miles per hour, 90, 80. But the runway was running out. 4,500 feet used, 4,500 feet remaining. 70 miles per hour, 60. The brakes were fading. Murdoch pumped harder, 50 miles per hour, 40. Campbell could see the runway end approaching. Grass beyond. Crash barrier. Emergency vehicles, 30 miles per hour, 25, 20. The bomber rolled to a stop with 800 feet of runway remaining. Campbell shut down the engines. The silence was absolute. For 7 hours and 5 minutes the engines had been running. Now they were quiet. The crew sat motionless, processing what had just happened. They had flown 1,200 miles into Germany, bombed Berlin, survived 103 flak hits, lost 2 engines, lost hydraulics, lost oxygen, lost a crew member, and landed safely. The odds against that outcome were astronomical. Campbell unbuckled his harness at 15:57. He stood slowly. His legs were shaking, not from fear, from exhaustion. His flight suit was soaked with hydraulic fluid. His hands ached from gripping the controls. Murdoch was crying, not dramatically, just silent tears, the stress releasing. They climbed out through the waste door. The ground crew was already inspecting the damage. An officer approached, Captain Morrison from RAF Manston. He walked around Milk Wagon slowly, counting holes. He stopped counting at 103. Morrison looked at Campbell. "How the hell did you fly this back?" Campbell had no answer. The bomber should have been destroyed over Berlin. The damage was catastrophic. Hydraulic lines severed, oxygen system destroyed, 2 engines gone, control cables damaged, ball turret destroyed. The aircraft was more holes than metal, but it had flown. Morrison called for the damage assessment team. They spent 3 hours cataloging every fragment penetration. 103 hits from 88mm flak fragments. 13 hits in critical systems. Hydraulic system destroyed. Oxygen distribution destroyed. Number 3, engine destroyed. Number 4, engine damaged beyond repair. Ball turret destroyed. Port wing main spar cracked. Tail section structure compromised. The aircraft was unsalvageable. Too much damage. Repair wasn't economically feasible. Milk Wagon would be stripped for parts. The engines would go to other aircraft. The guns would be redistributed. The airframe would be scrapped. The bomber that survived 103 flak hits over Berlin would end its service in an English salvage yard. Campbell and his crew returned to Grafton Underwood on March 25th. They were granted 7 days' leave. Sullivan's body was sent home to Chicago. His family received the telegram on March 29th. Staff Sergeant Michael Sullivan killed in action over Germany. The telegram didn't mention he died in a jammed ball turret. It didn't mention the aircraft flew 600 miles back to England with his body inside. It just said, "Killed in action." The 384th Bomb Group flew 314 missions during World War II. They lost 159 aircraft, 1,579 men killed or captured. The Berlin raid on March 24, 1944, cost them 6 bombers, 54 men. But the mission succeeded. 1,800 tons of bombs hit Berlin's industrial districts. Ball-bearing factories were damaged. Railroad marshalling yards destroyed. Aircraft production facilities set back by weeks. The strategic bombing campaign continued. Campbell flew 17 more missions. He completed his tour in July 1944, returned to the United States, trained new bomber pilots at MacDill Field in Florida. He never spoke about the Berlin raid, never mentioned the 103 flak hits, never talked about Sullivan dying in the ball turret. The memories were too heavy. After the war, Campbell returned to Ohio, worked for his father's construction company, married in 1947, 3 children. He attended veterans' reunions occasionally, saw members of his crew. They would drink quietly together, remember the missions, but mostly they talked about other things, normal things. The war was behind them. Campbell died in 1987 at age 66. Heart attack. His obituary mentioned his military service, decorated bomber pilot, Distinguished Flying Cross, Air Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters. The obituary didn't mention Berlin, didn't mention 103 flak hits, didn't mention flying 600 miles on 2 engines with no hydraulics. Those details were in military archives, mission reports filed and forgotten. The 384th Bomb Group's report for March 24, 1944, noted aircraft 42-31706 Milk Wagon sustained catastrophic battle damage but successfully returned to base. Recommendation for pilot commendation. The commendation was approved. Campbell received the Distinguished Flying Cross in August 1944. The citation read, "For extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight." First Lieutenant Robert L. Campbell distinguished himself by extraordinary achievement while serving as pilot of a B-17 aircraft on a bombardment mission over Berlin, Germany, on the 24th of March, 1944. Despite severe battle damage resulting in loss of 2 engines and complete hydraulic failure, Lieutenant Campbell maintained aircraft control and successfully returned his crew to base. His skill and determination reflect great credit upon himself and the United States Army Air Forces. The citation was accurate, but it didn't capture the reality, the mathematics of survival. 2 engines instead of 4. No hydraulics. No oxygen. 103 holes in the aircraft. 600 miles to safety. Every mile flown against the odds. Every minute in the air, a victory against mechanical failure and enemy action. The B-17 Flying Fortress earned its reputation through missions like this. The aircraft could absorb catastrophic damage and continue flying. The design philosophy emphasized survivability over performance, redundant systems, robust structure, protect the crew, bring them home. Wagon proved the philosophy worked. 103 hits, 1 crew member killed, 9 survived. The aircraft itself was destroyed, but the crew came home. That was the measure of success. Strategic bombing doctrine accepted losses, but it also demanded results. The March 24, 1944 raid on Berlin delivered both. The 8th Air Force lost 37 bombers. 370 men killed or captured, but 691 bombers reached Berlin. 1,800 tons of bombs were delivered on target. German industrial capacity was degraded. The Luftwaffe lost 72 fighters defending the city. Pilots killed. Aircraft destroyed. Resources that couldn't be replaced. The mathematics favored the Americans. They could replace losses. Germany couldn't. Every deep penetration raid accelerated German collapse. The Berlin raid was one mission in a campaign that lasted 3 years. 1.5 million tons of bombs dropped. 350,000 sorties flown. 26,000 American airmen killed. The cost was staggering, but the strategic result was decisive. German industry was shattered. Oil production collapsed. Transportation networks destroyed. Aircraft production disrupted. By 1945, the Luftwaffe couldn't defend German airspace. American bombers flew unopposed. Campbell's contribution was 1 mission, 7 hours, 103 flak hits, but multiply that by 26,000 crews flying 350,000 missions. The individual story becomes collective history. The bomber that survived becomes the bomber force that prevailed. Strategic bombing won the air war. Individual courage implemented the strategy. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We are rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about bomber crews who survived the impossible. Real people. Real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? You are not just a viewer. You are part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you are here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Robert Campbell and his crew don't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you are helping make that happen.